The United Kingdom The United Kingdom hosts a Quint meeting to discuss latest developments of Yemen crisis. In violating international law, Houthi militia targets with a ballistic missile populated area in Ma'rib. Houthi militia planted mines continue to claim lives of civilians nationwide. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swalem. Senior representatives of the governments of Oman, Saudi Arabia, UAE, UK and the US met in London on Wednesday to discuss the situation in Yemen. The UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg attended the meeting as a guest. They strongly condemned the Houthis' repeated attacks against civilians in Yemen, including US local staff in Sana'a, and their continued heinous terrorist attacks against Saudi Arabia and more recently the United Arab Emirates. They stated that such actions are obstructing peace efforts and exacerbating suffering. They reaffirmed that terrorism in all its forms and manifestations constitute one of the most serious threats to international peace and security, and underlined the need to hold perpetrators of acts of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice. The armed conflict in Yemen is entering its sixth year, making it the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Thousands of civilians have lost their lives and properties. Nearly 4 million people have been forced to flee to safer places across the country. Essential services have almost collapsed, leaving millions of people in Yemen vulnerable to a humanitarian crisis. More details are in the following report.
Crisis in Yemen remains extremely severe, with over 20.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. The crisis is fueled by conflict and is further exacerbated by the economy's decline, natural hazards such as floods or droughts, and epidemics, notably COVID-19. Millions of people are now in a situation where they can no longer meet their basic needs, with potentially serious impacts on groups in society with limited social capital and protection mechanisms. In 2021, the conflict escalated in several areas along fluid lines of control, with continued breaches of international humanitarian law, and consequent impacts on the protection of civilians. In 2022, the situation is expected to deteriorate further, and the severity of needs is expected to increase unless there is conflict de-escalation, improvements in the economy, revenue collection to sustain the public sector, and available humanitarian funding. With the grave humanitarian situation combined with economic collapse, sustained scale-up of humanitarian assistance is needed now. With the grave humanitarian situation combined with economic collapse, sustained scale-up of humanitarian assistance is needed now and in 2022. Aid agencies' famine prevention efforts were successful, but lack of sustained support now and in 2022 could aggravate the situation further by losing the progress achieved. The international community must seize immediate opportunities to stem Yemen's economic collapse. Robust economic support is feasible in Yemen and could quickly and substantially reduce the size of humanitarian needs.
At least 28 civilians were killed and injured in a rocket attack by the Iranian Houthi militia targeting a residential neighborhood in central Ma'rib in northeastern Yemen. According to sources, at least 6 civilians were killed, including a woman and 5 children. Houthi militia had so far shelled the city with more than 300 ballistic and non-ballistic missiles, as well as drones targeting neighborhoods packed with civilians and displaced people in the camps. Houthi militia continues their war against Yemenis. In a new one, the rebels have fired a ballistic missile on a populated area in Ma'rib city, leaving more than 28 casualties. The following report has more details.
This is how the scene looked for us of these children who were targeted by Houthi militia with the ballistic missile that they fired at a residential neighborhood, leaving 28 martyrs and wounded, most of them children. The attack is an extension of the crimes of the systematic and deliberate bombardment launched by Houthi militia on residential neighborhoods and civilians in the densely populated city of Ma'rib and the displaced from various governorates. Deliberate targeting of residential neighborhoods and civilians in a full-fledged war crime, a cowardly act of revenge that reflects the state of bankruptcy suffered by Houthi militia after horrific defeats and losses that incurred at the hands of the heroes of the government forces, the resistance, and the giant brigades on various battlefronts. The Yemeni government condemned the direct targeting and called on the international community, the United Nations, human rights organizations, and UN and American envoys to issue a clear and explicit condemnation of this heinous crime and to work quickly to include the Houthi militia on the international terrorist lists, to prosecute their leaders and to ensure that these crimes do not go unpunished.
Moro tribes have announced to fight alongside the Giants Brigades to liberate Yemen from the Houthi militia. This follows the liberation of the Giants Brigades in the southern province of Ma'rib. The announcement by Moro tribes is a resounding blow to the Houthis and will lead to the rapid collapse of the militia ranks across the southern Ma'rib directorates. Moro tribes are also condemned also the recent Houthi terrorist attacks on civilian areas in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. The Houthi militia lost considerably in order to control the vital and rich Ma'rib with energy resources and the last major stronghold of the Yemeni government in the north of the country. The Washington Institute report suggested that the nature of the Houthi militia's recent attack on Abu Dhabi was likely to be worrying enough to resume internal U.S. discussions about designating the group as a foreign terrorist organization or imposing additional sanctions on its members. Reports indicate that the militia has lost more than 38,000 fighters since last February, 90% of whom were killed on Ma'rib fronts. The internet services were shut down in Harib city south of Ma'rib and Ain west of Shabwa for the last couple of days. Local sources said that the Houthi militia continued for a week to cut off mobile networks for Yemen Mobile, Sabah Phone, MTN, fixed phone and wired internet services in Harib city in Ma'rib and Ain. According to the sources, the militia cut off all communication and internet services from the two districts in order to obscure its violations and crimes against civilians and to take civilians as human shields as a result of the defeats it has received at the hands of the Giants' forces and their tribal supporters. The terrorist Houthi militia in the capital Sana'a stormed the headquarters of a number of community radio stations and closed their broadcasts in light of their continuing war on the rest of the media in their areas of control. Local sources said that during the past few days, the Houthi militia stormed a number of headquarters of a number of radio stations in Sana'a, confirming that they closed 5 radio stations after storming them and confiscating their broadcasting equipment by force of arms, the last of which was Voice of Yemen, which stopped broadcasting by force. The joint forces continue to fight Houthi militias on the western coast, coinciding with their continuous defeats south of Ma'rib. The military media of the joint forces reported that the units stationed in the lines of fire on Maghbana fronts west of Taiz and the districts of Jabal Ras and Al-Jarrahi in Hudaydah inflicted heavy human and material losses on the Irani-backed militia with concentrated strikes. Also, the joint brigades, with the support of the Arab coalition aircraft, were able to liberate the districts that were under the control of the militia affiliated with Iran in Shabwa. Then the joint brigades continued their advance and liberated Harib district. The Houthi war has so far resulted in the killing and injuring of 377,000 Yemenis. The terrorist Houthi militia has killed hundreds of thousands of Yemenis over the past years, with various types of weapons, committing the most heinous crimes against humanity in the world. The United Nations Development Programme indicated that the war ignited by the Houthi militia had killed 377,000 Yemenis until the end of 2021. And among this number, the majority were children and women. The report assessing the impact of war in Yemen, Path to Recovery, issued by the United Nations Development Programme in 2021, confirmed that 60% of the total deaths in Yemen are caused by conflict-related issues, such as lack of access to food, water, and health care. Landmines planted by the Houthi militia and unexploded ordnance have caused nearly 9,000 civilian casualties since the beginning of the conflict. Mines and explosives from the Houthi militia deployed in many areas of Yemen are hampering humanitarian action and deepening the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. According to reports by international organizations, the number of incidents of explosive ordnance continue to increase, complicating humanitarian access and isolating people from livelihoods and services. Coming next. High prices and hard living conditions deepen suffering of people in Ma'rib.
اضطرينا أن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستنقذكم يا محويتني الله يستنقذ.
A recent international report issued by the World Food Programme has warned that food security will collapse in 6 countries, including Yemen. This comes when the military escalation gets intensified, especially with the Houthi rebels targeting the UAE. The following report has more details.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Food Programme warned that acute food insecurity is likely to deteriorate further in 20 countries, or a situation called hunger hotspots, during the outlook period from February to May 2022. Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen remain at the highest alert level from the previous edition of this report. In their last available assessments, these countries all had parts of populations identified or projected to experience starvation and death, requiring the most urgent attention. In Yemen, the latest available analysis issued in December 2020 projected rising catastrophic levels of food insecurity in 3 governorates and deteriorating emergency levels in other parts by June 2021. While increased humanitarian assistance by July 2021 contributed to a stabilization of food insecurity,
Recent data across the north and south of Yemen gives evidence of deteriorating trend in the food insecurity situation, while underlying drivers of food insecurity continue to deteriorate. Organized violence or conflict remains the primary drives, actual or potential for acute hunger in the hunger hotspots and globally. Targeted humanitarian action is urgently needed to save lives and livelihoods in the 20 hunger hotspots. Moreover, in 4 of these hotspots, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Yemen, humanitarian actions are critical to preventing starvation and death. The report provides country-specific recommendations on priorities for emergency response, as well as expecting action to address existing humanitarian needs and ensure short-term protective interventions before new needs materialize.
After days of stability, a new fuel crisis occurred in Aden. The fuel crisis has re-emerged after about a week of stabilization of supplies in government and private sales stations. Label sources in the Yemeni oil company in Aden attributed the causes of the new crisis to the poor distribution of fuel quantities that arrived at the company recently. The sources said that more than a week ago, the oil company received quantities of more than 30,000 metric tons of fuel, which it distributed to private and governmental stations a few days ago. That contributed to the stability of the market. Despite the gradual recovery of the rial, citizens keep complaining about high prices of food items. Some accuse local traders of not sticking to the new government measures in terms of reducing prices to alleviate the suffering of people. The following report looks at how high prices have become a burden to people in Marib.
The ongoing war that has lasted for more than 7 years and its catastrophic consequences are reflected on Yemenis' daily life. The bad economic situation turned the lives of Yemenis into hell and caused a struggle that almost made them worse in light of the absence of the income for families, so that the beginning of this year witnessed a significant improvement in the exchange rate, while food prices remained at the same crazy rise or a slight decline that does not change the lives of citizens to any better.
Despite change in real rate, food items prices remain high as they are. Both traders and money exchanges are responsible for it. We call upon authorities to immediately intervene and tackle this situation.
The rise in prices includes all food products, vegetables and clothes, and made citizens at the mercy of relief organizations and what they offer. The Office of Industry and Experimentations in the Governorate said that the violations included many merchants who are still taking advantage of the economic situation.
The past period witnessed the recovery of the rial. Trade and Industry Office in Marib City is doing its duties in terms of monitoring breaches of law. We've conducted field visits in which 26 violations were spotted. We closed 5 stores and other were proceeded to the court. The rest has been dealt with according to the law. As for the differences in prices, they are not big with wholesale stores. We do monitor it closely. However, such differences can be found with small stores. Some say they have stock and they bought it with high price, so it's hard for them to sell it at a cheap one. That's why you find such price difference. Yet, we keep monitoring it closely.
Despite the government oversight and the continuous notifications to determine the value of foodstuffs, the city is still witnessing the same rise and inconsistency in prices from one place to another. For the matter that citizens hope to intensify control and impose the law to control violators to reduce the requirements of life for them.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 54 new positive cases of COVID-19 and 2 deaths, in an indication of the 4th new wave of the pandemic. The new cases were recorded in Hadramaut, Al-Dala, Ma'rib, Socotra, Taiz, Lahj and Al-Mahra. This brings the number of positive cases to 10,842, including 2,005 deaths and 7,086 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The United United Kingdom hosts a Quint meeting to discuss latest developments of Yemen crisis. In violating international law, Houthi militia targets with a ballistic missile populated area in Ma'rib. Houthi militia planted mines continue to claim lives of civilians nationwide. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.